available to folks who want to see it. All right. Well, it's my honor to open the meeting. We have such a great group of people here. It's really great to be with you tonight. I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank especially Dr. Burnett and Dr. Vanderpoy, who blessed this meeting when it was still just a concept, and that gives us the opportunity to embark on this conversation that we're going to have tonight, and so that's the first step. And I just want to say especially thanks to those two. And then of course, so we have the this folks from Central Texas Interfaith, the institutional partner that we've been working with almost now for maybe 12 to 18 months on an experiential learning project for our students to get a real world experience with politics. And it's out of that conversation that this meeting takes place. And it's an opportunity for us to explore some promising developments that are emerging out of this work. And so I'm excited about the night ahead. And it's my duty as well to take a few minutes to take us through some introductions. And so I just want to make sure that we're aware of the special people who are here tonight. And so I want to start by, of course, recognizing Dr. Burnett, Dr. Colette Pierce Burnett, president of the university. And then, of course, Dr. Archie Vanderpoy, the provost, is here with us. Dr. Amanda Massino is the president of the Faculty Advisory Committee. And that's the body that represents the voice of the faculty. And then, of course, we have as well students who have been leaders, emerging leaders through In Public Leadership, which is the student organization that's been created to support the partnership. And that would be Kennedy Fears, who's the president. And I'm waiting on Kaylee Norman. She's the vice president. Danny Payne is the secretary, and Dakari Gatlin is the treasurer. Very good. And I see also Dr. Kraft is here. Hello, Dr. Kraft.
Hello, hello.
Nice to see you, my friend. And then I would like to have please welcome the leaders of Central Texas Interfaith to take a few minutes and introduce themselves to us and the institutions they represent.
Well, I guess I'll start. Sammy Hall, the leader with Central Texas Interfaith East Side Cluster and community policing team, and board member with Henry over at Capital Idea.
I'm Henry Sines. I am a member of Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church, a leader with Central Texas Interfaith. Like Sammy said, I'm involved in Capital Idea, and I'm on the East Side Cluster, though I live in South Austin.
My name is Dorothy Doolittle. I'm from St. David's Episcopal Church, and leader with Central Texas Interfaith and community policing and criminal justice reform.
I'm Fanny Akinbala, a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church in East Austin, one of the original members of what was Austin Interfaith back in the day. I'm a leader with Austin Interfaith, and I'm working presently with community policing.
Joy Pentecoff, Congregational Church of Austin. I'm on the board of Capital Idea and working with the Houston Tillotson Partnership.
I'm Whit Bodman, Congregational Church of Austin.
I'm Doug Greco. I am the lead organizer with Central Texas Interfaith. Great to be here.
Monique.
I'm Monique Vasquez. I'm an organizer with the North and Central clusters in Austin and also Bastrop County.
I'm Catherine Wicker. I'm organizing with Central Texas Interfaith in Hays County and in South Austin with some of the congregations there.
think that's all of us.
Okay. Well, now, so let me make sure I'm getting a Zoom message here. Okay. Very good. Let's see here. All right. Now, this is a small group, but there are institutions behind each one of us. And so I want you to keep in mind that fact. And all told, this partnership that the university is now in with Central Texas Interfaith represents a coalition of, is it 50 plus institutions? So we're a small group, but please keep in mind that the power of the collaboration that's forming here. And it's precisely the promise of the kind of things that are possible when people work together that is the purpose or the focus of tonight's meeting. It's to explore what we might do working together as a community of institutions that have very similar commitments. We're going to talk about that in the context of education, because education is an issue that students surfaced. And of course, creates the possibility for a broad conversation about, within a political context, about what our region, Central Texas, is doing by way of education. But there are other issues that we're able to speak to when we work together like this. And it's this process of learning to work together in collaboration that the purpose of this, that's the purpose of this meeting. And so then before we adjourn tonight, the leaders from Central Texas Interfaith are going to talk about opportunities for us to dig in and to actually develop agendas and action items that reflect our interests. But that's the next step. Tonight we want to get to know each other and learn about the collaborative process that we're learning about and that our students are being exposed to. That is such a powerful experience and practice of the shared effort and what's possible when communities work together. Yeah. Now, I call this it's a collaborative process. The organization Central Texas Interfaith has a name for it that they use, broad-based organizing. So tonight is an opportunity for us to learn about this process, broad-based organizing, which we can use to develop a consensus to work together around education, but other issues as well. Yeah. All right. Very good. Now let's see here. I'd like to say, by the way, I wonder, did we hand out, did the agenda for tonight's meeting go out? Because I can perhaps send that out, but I'll put that in the chat as soon as I get a chance. But now I want to, as a part of the conversation of this collaborative effort, I want to make sure that we understand that this is this work is a politics that's driven by issues, not political parties, not electoral. We're not talking about running a candidate for office. I think it's better to think in terms of ourselves as providing the kind of leadership that we think our region deserves. And so it's an issue-driven politics that, and the issues emerge out of the conversations that the members of institutions have when they come together to explore common ground. So I want to make it clear this is not partisan. And in literature that I've shared for invitation to the meeting, I wanted to go ahead and I put the university's policy with respect to political activity so that we're clear that we're well within the policy through this approach, which is an issue-driven approach. Now, if I may just say a little bit about the history of our engagement, the university's engagement with Central Texas Interfaith. As I mentioned, it started maybe 18 months ago through contact and information and looking for ways of giving our students opportunities to connect up the university experience with the tumultuous events over the summer last year, with the terrible death of George Floyd, and then the the pandemic, which has been such a gut-wrenching experience for all of us. But it was initial conversations between Gene Jones and myself, Dr. Kraft, Reverend, exploring ways of seeing if we could link students' university experience with a politics that would speak to their values. And of course, a values-driven politics that comes out of the experience of our students is the kind of opportunity that the engagement with Central Texas Interfaith can give us. And so we've been doing this, putting this into place. We've had some opportunities to put some ideas into practice, and we've had a couple early accomplishments. And I'd like to give Kennedy a chance to speak to that, if she might. Kennedy, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, everyone.
Can you tell us a little bit about the early road on this journey?
Yes, my name is Kennedy Fears. I'm a political science major, president of public leadership. This process hasn't been easy, but the challenges I feel we all enjoy because it helps us grow. It definitely helped me grow as an individual. Personally, I've been a student leader for quite some time, but nothing compared to what I've been doing with public leadership in faith and social justice traditions. Because of Central Texas Interfaith, because of the proper trainings they have provided us on how to run a proper house meeting, it has changed the way I personally view what leadership actually is. Emotionally as well, just listening to my classmates, my peers, hearing what they have to say, hearing what concerns they have or problems they have, actually growing a real connection, making a real relationship with them and wanting to see change is the reason why we keep calling these house meetings together. I feel as though our peers depend on us to make not only the university listen, but those of higher power as well, because there is a life outside of HT that needs to be spoken on as well. So thank you guys for showing up, listening, and most of all, being a part of what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Kennedy. And then we're going to hear from some other student leaders as well a little bit later. But at this moment, I'd like to go ahead and give the folks from Central Texas Interfaith an opportunity to discuss their approach and the organization. So I think Fanny, can you take it from here?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Saresa. I'm Fanny Akinbala with Ebenezer Baptist Church, and I'm going to give you a little bit of the history of how what initially started as Austin Interfaith got started. There were churches in East Austin that came together in about 1988 to address issues around education in public schools, lack of playgrounds, lack of supportive after school enrichment programs for children, street issues. These congregations came together and formed a coalition that empowered them to be able to come together and form a coalition that was able to turn out votes and also get the ear of the public politicians and school board leaders in order to make changes in the communities that would make life better for the everyday people in that community. And they did that by having house meetings with people in their congregations, talking about the issues, concerns, and what was important to them, and then develop in a strategy to address those issues. Our organization now is Central Texas Interfaith because we have expanded to a 10-county area. We have over 50 churches, congregations, unions, and HT, becoming a part of us as well. And we are still focused on doing what's best and training people in our institutions on how to develop agendas of issues and how to follow through in getting those issues addressed. We are nonpartisan. We do not support candidates. Our agenda of issues is our candidate, and we work very hard to hold public officials accountable through assemblies, through meetings periodically and to accountability sessions. And we follow through with that once these people are in office. And of course, we're very, very focused on continuing to educate and have persons in our congregations turn out to vote. We do not endorse candidates, but we do vote, and we do hold politicians accountable once they're in office.
Thank you, Ms. Akinbala. I'm going to talk about the Central Texas Interfaith agenda of issues. And as the training proceeds this evening, Mr. Greco is going to let you know how these came to be the CTI agenda of issues. The first issue is job training. We've had several of us are on the board of Capital Idea. It does long-term job training, does a beautiful job of it. Education, the HT partnership is a part of that agenda item. Community policing, you've heard mentioned a couple of times. You'll hear more about that. Affordable housing and healthcare, our COVID response, and so forth. So those are the headline agenda issues for us. I would like to make a comment about the importance of the CTI and HT partnership. We believe that HT, Houston-Tillotson University, has students who will create the Central Texas of the future, as well as in other places across this United States and perhaps even in the world. And we are honored to be a part of developing the leadership potential of your students. We are very interested in how our institutions can work together. And I want to give kudos and thanks to Reverend Dr. Whitney Bodman. If you would please wave Dr. Bodman. He is a member of Congregational Church of Austin. Congregational Church, once upon a time, had a really close relationship with Houston-Tillotson, and we really are looking forward to renewing that relationship. And we are happy to, through the gift of Dr. Bodman and Reverend Elizabeth Nash, both Congregational Church members, we are happy to provide a semester of support for the new research assistant internship that the political science department will be creating. So, and then we are very much looking forward to continued fundraising to support this position in the future.
You know you're on tape, Dr. Petticoat. We got you on tape.
Okay.
Dr. Bodman, you too. You know that, right?
Yep.
Okay.
I see the flashing red light.
I know, and I had a chance to chat with Dr. Burnett. She knows a little bit about Capital Idea, I believe, right?
One of the predecessors to Capital Idea was the Summer Youth Employment Program that was started through the Austin Interfaith back in the early 90s, I believe, and that program is still going. And of course, it was out of the success with the Summer Youth Employment Program that Capital Idea was formed, because we had too many people in our congregations who were underemployed or unemployed. So we worked with business leaders, and also Capital Idea, not Capital, Austin Interfaith leaders, and also some corporate persons to help, and with city-state funding was able to get that program developed and off the ground and running in about 1998. And that program has been very, very successful with training adults in jobs that pay living wages in the healthcare and technology areas. There are others as well, but for sure, those are two of our big successes with dealing with people and employment and cost of living issues.
I was just in a meeting with Stephen Jacobs yesterday afternoon talking about the nursing and the dental hygienist program. He's probably been one of my allies since I first got to Austin and taken my position. He and I have actually become friends.
It's wonderful.
So we were doing some brainstorming yesterday about some strategies on how to increase equity in the limited number of spaces at ACC.
Right.
Great. So
Yes.
am I up next, Professor?
I think that, yes, Doug, let's move on now. We're going to hear from Doug Greco, is the lead organizer at Central Texas Interfaith, and he's going to share with us a discussion of the CTI method of broad-based organizing.
Great. And one of our other colleagues joined the meeting, Liz Lagawa. Would you introduce yourself to folks?
Yes, my sincere apologies. It's good to be with you this evening. I'm Liz Lagawa, organizing with CTI with McLennan and Brazos counties.
Great, thanks for joining us. Okay, so my role tonight is to lead a conversation around kind of what is this thing we call broad-based organizing, and just so that you, as leaders of HT, could kind of better understand who we are, and that we could then think together about how this partnership might be mutually beneficial. I came to Austin after college in '97, and I was a teacher at what is now Eastside Memorial High. At that point was Johnston High, and taught for 5 years English and social studies. And I felt I went to a decent college, but I never learned how to become a leader within my community. I wasn't taught that in college. It was when I was a teacher and I was struggling my first year at 125 students, and we had a high principal turnover rate, teacher turnover rate, and you could predict with that you're going to have a high student dropout rate when the adults are leaving the school as well. And I struggled my first couple of years, and we started working with Austin Interfaith. And it really became my school of public life, how to engage as a teacher and develop relationships with parents, with other teachers, with the principal. How can we organize a meeting with a school board member to advocate for what we want? And all of that boiled down to developing relationships and getting outside of my classroom and realizing if we could think strategically as churches, as schools, as other organizations in the community, and organize the adults together, and we also organize students, then we could really have a hand in shaping the future of the school. But it really turned my life around professionally because I was frankly struggling, and the organizing became my, we call CTI a university of public life, where you can learn citizenship skills, how to learn to deal with the realities of power and how they operate in the city. And frankly, in an area like Austin, the inequalities of power, geography, income. So that was and for the last 15 years, for the next 15 years, I organized with Austin Interfaith and our sister organizations in San Antonio, Los Angeles, and back here in Austin over the last 3 years. I'll just say the other thing I would add to what Ms. Akimbala and Joy, Dr. Penikoff talked about is we're part of a national network called the Industrial Areas Foundation, which is the largest and longest standing network of faith and community-based organizations in the country. Goes back to Chicago in the 1940s, and then Rochester in the 1960s, and have 60 organizations across the country that do this work. 10 are in Texas, and Austin Interfaith, Central Texas Interfaith, is one of the oldest. And our process of organizing is not far from the only way to organize, and far from the only effective way to organize. There are lots of ways to organize and lots of traditions. But we're here to kind of share what are some of the things that we have found useful that kind of define this style of organizing. understanding we're always trying to live up to that model. Let me ask this question. When you hear the word organizing, you know, what are some of the traditions or key figures or movements you think about when you hear the word organizing? What comes to mind?
Civil rights movement.
The civil rights movement, okay. Probably the most prominent and movement within US history. What are some other movements? We've got the civil rights movement. What are some other organizing movements?
Labor unions, which...
Labor unions, okay.
Chicano movement.
Dr. Kraft? What do you think of when you think of organizing? Women's suffrage, great. Liz?
Chicano movement.
The Chicano movement, okay. So there's a whole tradition of movement organizing, of which the civil rights movement is probably the most prominent, but there's some similarities in that. What are other kinds of organizing? What about labor organizing? What are some of the prominent labor organizations in US history?
AFL-CIO.
AFL-CIO, okay. Others?
Teamsters.
Teamsters, okay, Jimmy Hoffa, all right. The
Auto workers union.
The auto workers, the mine workers, okay. And so there's a whole kind of tradition of union organizing, and there's a whole tradition of civic organizing, of small clubs, local clubs. Where I grew up, it was the Knights of Columbus, okay, in the Catholic Church. At Holy Cross Catholic Church, it's the Knights of Peter Claver, the Kiwanis Club, the Elks Club, the Moose Club, okay.
We had a burial union in my small community in the rural South. We didn't have insurance or burial arrangements, et cetera, so people paid into a fund through churches, and through that they were able to bury their deceased family members.
Pooling resources, kind of a mutual aid, okay, and there's a whole kind of tradition of mutual aid societies. Frankly, in Austin during the storm, a lot of these mutual aid groups rose up, okay. So there's a whole tradition of civic groups, mutual aid groups, settlement houses, that are also ways to organize effectively around issues, okay? So and they borrow from, you know, they borrow from each other, okay? The civil rights movement was very strongly rooted in the African-American church, obviously, but that was kind of the roots of the civil rights movement. And so, you know, in broad-based organizing, we try to organize through institutions like congregations and schools and labor unions because of the roots that gives us to communities. Okay, so I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint and just lay out 4 or 5 of the fundamentals of what distinguishes broad-based organizing. And you're going to notice we borrow from many of these different styles of organizing. The institutional nature, especially with congregations, from the civil rights movement, living wage strategies and worker strategies from the labor movement. So let me try to pull up my PowerPoint. And when I was a teacher, we didn't have this, and I had horrible handwriting, but let me start my slideshow. I always have to check. Do you see broad-based organizing up there? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. We talked about some of so the purpose, every style of organizing is suited to its own purpose, okay? The purpose of broad-based organizing, we say, over the long term, over the 30, 40-year history of Central Texas Interfaith, or our sister organization, COPS in San Antonio, is to build sustained political power. To build sustained political power. And in organizing, we often try to reclaim terms like power and politics that we have trouble with because we often have negative experiences. But we talk about power as capacity, or the ability to act, the ability to create change. Think of the power, the moral and the people power within the civil rights movement, the capacity to create change through protest, through direct action. That's the kind of power we're talking about. So it's relational power, power among people, not top down, but shared. It's institutional. We think that power resides in organizations and institutions, and we don't organize individuals. We organize congregations, schools, labor unions, health clinics, because especially in working class, poor communities, communities of color, those are the institutions where people are already connected to power. So if we can build on that and bring those institutions together, we have a chance to create change. So it's not power for power's sake, okay? It's power to act on our values, our shared democratic and faith values. It's power to move an agenda forward, not power to just kind of exert for the sake of raw force. I'm going to ask one of my colleagues, Henry, to share a story of rental assistance and how we created power to create change around funding for families that were facing eviction. Henry? You're on.
Yes, I'm sorry. I got a phone call on my mother's line. I want to lay down an example of organized people and organized power to affect a positive change for communities in time of need. When the pandemic landed in Austin and around the world last year, the devastation was immediate, and city officials tried to come up with a program to help people who had lost their jobs and were unable to pay rent, utilities, and provide food. They came up with a figure of about $1 million initially. And then CTI did a dive into the communities and organized phone banks and stuff like that, and called people and talked to them about their needs. And we found that $1 million just wasn't going to cut it. So through meetings with city leaders and county officials, we were able to get a commitment of nearly $40 million. And then we took it further, pushing for the rent and rise funds that were a continuation to help people who were unable to qualify for the stimulus packages and then get rental relief. So it was no small achievement, and I'm very proud of the work that we did.
Thank you, Mr. Sines. And that's the kind of power we're talking about. Can we develop enough? And it took meetings, many of these leaders in every city council district, we did a meeting with a council member because we had congregations in each of those areas. That's the kind of power we're talking about. And when we talk about politics, we're thinking of democracy. We're thinking of participation. We're not thinking about endorsing a candidate or not. But the idea that an ordinary, parent at a school could sit down with her city council member and advocate for rental assistance or eviction moratoriums. So I'm going to stop there and ask for questions or reactions to this notion of building an organization around creating sustained political power. Reactions or thoughts, especially from some of the Huston-Tillotson stakeholders or students.
I have a quick question, and I apologize everyone for not having my video on. I can turn it on for a moment, and you can see I'm getting these weird horizontal lines that are very distracting to me, and probably to you looking at me. I'm most familiar with these movements when they are organized around a particular set of values and set of issues. So I think I'm interested as to why an interfaith group is engaged in particular in this kind of action. So what are the shared values or areas of action that bring you together as a group for organizing?
I would say two main traditions. One is the democratic tradition and the idea of citizenship participation, which trumps, we always say the first issue, the biggest and most important issue is really having a seat at the table and being able to advocate. But that is If you can do that, then you can fight for rental assistance or immigration reform or funding for higher ed. The other is our faith values in the broadest sense, that cut across many traditions, and even beyond churches, which is about justice, which is about neighborliness, which is about fairness, which is about making decisions based on the least among us, and how will that affect those who are most marginalized. That comes out of our Judeo-Christian traditions, or Judeo-Christian and Islam. So those would be the two, when we talk about our core values, that those are the core values that we bind around rather than any one issue. And there are some movements that are focused on issue, and rightly so. That's the form of a movement, is an anti-war movement is focused to end a war. That's laser focused. But it's different, broad-based organizing is a little different. So we've got to kind of root it in the traditions of those institutions that would sustain us. Are there any other responses to that question from other CTI folks? Does that help answer your question a bit? Okay.
Yes,
I
thank
just
you.
add that from our relationships, that's how a lot of issues emerge, and from house meetings and building relationships with folks, that's how we learn a lot of the things that guide our work.
So we also talk about relationships before issues, that we lead with what's happening with the person. From there, if they have some passion or anger or imagination around an issue, then we take on the issue that leads us, because we know there's somebody behind it that is willing to put in some time. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So how do you see the CTI method being different from the other organized movements that we talked about earlier? What makes the CTI method different?
Well, like I say, first of all, we're hopefully borrowing from the best of the other traditions. So there was a kind of a key civil rights figure, Bayard Rustin, who I'm sure y'all.
It's a historically Black college. He's an HBCU graduate, Wilberforce University.
That's okay. That's right. There's a great biography that some of us just read. I mean, so he was influenced the HBCU and also the pacifist tradition, the Quaker, and he was, essentially an advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King and the executive director of the March on Washington. And he wrote this article called Protest to Politics after the March on Washington, somewhere in the mid 60s, I think. We read a lot because he basically said the tactics and the movement organizing of the civil rights movement to that point was instrumental in changing hearts, minds, and legislation, and that the idea of raising an awareness to an issue through protest, through oratory, through direct action. But then he said, now that we have a chance to be at the table, we have to change our tactics a bit, and we have to build coalitions and understand, the kind of the idea of negotiation and compromise. And so that article, I think we look to, because we think of that as kind of what we try to lift up, which is, what does it take then to maintain a seat at the table where decisions are made, and what does it take to demonstrate that kind of power? So I think we're always thinking about how to pick an agenda that is wide enough to bring the most number of folks into the coalition. How do we think of an agenda that brings in folks from Hays County, from Bastrop County? We have sister organizations in Houston. And sometimes we pass on issues that maybe, folks are passionate about in order to kind of keep the coalition together. So I would say probably more of a focus on creating a broad agenda versus one single unifying issue. A focus on developing leaders as a collective, a broad set of leaders. And if you can see the CTI leaders on this call, is a pretty broad set of leaders. so that we are diverse in our thinking and we are diverse in our agenda, and we're able to kind of show that we have broad support in and around issues. I guess the last thing I would say is, and this comes from just as much out of our own kind of history and why organizations have fallen through over time, is the idea of really raising our own money from the grassroots. Congregations pay dues. The congregations here pay between $1,000, $2,000, some $5,000, so that they kind of own the organization. We try not to rely on grant funding, outside funding, because we have seen with our own organizations or with some movements that are funded by maybe outside funders, that money, when it goes away, the movement can fall through. So I would say, having a broad agenda, having a diverse collective of leaders, having local money that the leaders raise through their own dues, through individual contributions and corporate contributions, are the things that we have found kind of distinguish this kind of organizing from other types.
If I could just add to this for a second, Doug, the issue of education came out of concerned students wanted to work around. And so that we're talking about students taking the lead on a big issue like that. And of course, we can't do that without the blessing of the institution. And that's where this conversation started, that preceded this meeting tonight, because we wanted to act on education, but we had to make sure it was okay with the institution, our institution. And so then the conversation with Dr. Vanderpoort, Dr. Burnett, and here we are. But it's there are other, of course, issues that CTI is involved with, but the students' interest in education is where this particular meeting, the genesis of this particular meeting, and hoping to do something about that.
I can ask one more question,
please.
And I apologize because I'll have to hop off. I have at 8 o'clock. What's the relationship with IACT, if any?
They're separate organizations, of which many of our congregations belong to both. I would, obviously, I'm more familiar with our organization. The focus is on broad-based organizing, leadership development, and kind of building a sustainable, nonpartisan political organization. Whereas IACT, I think their focus is on a couple things. One would be interfaith dialogue in and around some of the major faith traditions, and looking at some global issues, but also locally, and then also a lot of service work that they have done as well. Whit, I know you're familiar with IACT, right? How would you distinguish the two?
Yeah, I think that's quite fair. Service and interfaith relations, they don't get involved in political work at all, or policy work, except in very tangential ways. So I think, and they're not so much of a member institution the way that CTI is. Has a much broader scope of membership or involvement.
Now, if I can, because we hit on this, Dr. Burnett kind of led me to this question, so I've covered a bit of this, but let me just kind of, we think about our membership institutionally, like we had said, for a number of reasons, because think of Ebenezer Baptist Church. Ms. Akimbala, how many years has Ebenezer been on the East Side?
146, 47 years.
Okay. How about Houston Tillotson?
146 years.
So, so if we organize just around individuals, none of us are going to outlast these institutions. And if we build Austin Interfaith around an East Side group, Our Lady of Guadalupe, Holy Cross Catholic Church, Mount Olive Baptist, these are 100-year, 150-year, that it gives the organization both a perspective, an institutional history, an understanding of the history of the East Side, but also longevity and values that have helped sustain those institutions. So we root ourselves in institutions for that very reason. And institutions are going to outlast all of us. So we are an organization of institutions. And in terms of our leadership, and there's some stories we're going to lift up, but I want to make sure I just cover a little bit of this. We look for a diverse collective. We want to be as broad as possible so we don't kind of get pigeonholed. This is very pragmatic as well as just giving us a much richer perspective on the areas that we're working in. And I'm not going to go too much into leaders, but to say that we define a leader as someone who has a following and can deliver it. So we're not looking necessarily for leaders who have written, 3 books or have tended, we want leaders of all types. And there's a leader, Maria Lopez, in a trailer park that we work with through her congregation. And she shows up to every meeting and she can bring 5, 10, 15, 20 people to a meeting. And she can organize a meeting with 80 people at her trailer park. So Maria, in our definition, is a leader. And we want her to work with someone who's written 3 books as well, because we need their expertise and they can learn from each other. And then, like I said, we value and we have found that if the organization is rooted in local money, if the congregations and member institutions own the organization, then they will help, they will have ownership of it, they will feel more invested, but they will control it. And then we as organizers work for the institutions, not for a foundation. And y'all know, I mean, how that goes. Foundations are wonderful and we take the money, but we kind of report to them when we're taking that money. And we want to spend most of the money on talent. So very low overhead. Our budget is 85% on organizers, training, development of leaders. And most of our leadership, all of our leadership is volunteer except for the organizers, but they are the front face of the organization. And then issues, we want to be multi-issued, and we'll talk a little bit about how we develop an agenda, but that agenda needs to be broad if we're going to pull in a lot of folks. So Houston-Tillotson may be concerned about higher ed funding. In some of the House meetings and training, students have said policing is an issue that they are very concerned with. Housing is an issue they're concerned with, the cost of housing in Austin. So, but are folks willing to look at what's happening in South Austin as well, so that, Wildflower Church may work with HT on higher ed funding, and maybe HT works with our South Side clusters on affordable housing on the South Side. So we kind of work with each other. And we think of action not as the be all and the end all, but action is a way to develop individuals as leaders. Action gives us an experience to prepare, to go into action and evaluate how we did. It's a leadership development experience, okay? I'm gonna stop there for a second and we're gonna go back to a few stories, but because of your question, Dr. Burnett, I wanted to lay out, those are the distinguishing factors of CTI, and we think is why, even though we have not jumped into every issue, and there are some issues that we can't agree on within our congregations that we don't take on, we have been able to last because we have focused on some of those fundamentals. Let me ask for any reactions or thoughts before we kind of turn to agenda setting. Let me ask, where is Ms. Messina? Any other thoughts? Dr. Kraft, any other thoughts, or Mr. Van de Pue? Any reaction so far?
Yeah, I just think the organization brings something very important to our campus. A lot of people are knowledgeable about how to do a march, and that's important to have those kind of organization. But but the hard work of developing community is something that people need to learn. We need to really understand those skills at our school. And President Burnett, I was wondering if you have some more thoughts before you leave about what you think we can do together, the institution, Central Interfaith and HT.
Of course, all the items that were listed are the things that you guys have been engaged in, are things that from the rental assistance all the way to community policing are clearly things that the university would be, that the university is not, to say interested in sounds small, because we're not interested and we have that's something that's important to us because it affects the life of our students and the faculty and the staff. All of those things, those are all pillars of someone having a high quality of life, which is what we want for everybody. The only hesitation that I would have is that the university is not in a position to make a political statement. I'm, as the president, I can't run out there and say, I want John Doe to win. So that's just the only hesitation I have, that we wouldn't be in a position to be able to endorse something from a political perspective. But as far as having a stance for something that the institution believes, and that's a hard thing to say because who is the institution and how does it define it? Community policing is a classic example. We could have people on campus that are anti-community policing. So we'd have to have, a real discussion about the campus, like I don't make the decision of what the university stands for. So and I'm sure you have the same conversations within your own congregations, that not everybody leans into the same thing. So I really like that whole concept about discussions and the house meetings. I really, really appreciate that. And that's how we all learn about a topic, because most people don't really understand what community policing or defunding the police really is. So it's really a great example. So I'm excited about being able to partner because I use this all the time. So the people on the call that are on my team are probably sick of me saying it, but I believe it. And it's this African proverb that says you can go fast. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So the stronger partnerships that we can build as an institution and give our students this platform to learn about movements and social justice and how to be a leader in all capacities. I'm super interested in that. And I really want to take an opportunity to say thank you for funding an internship. That's super important. And I want to reiterate that the red light is still flashing. So that was recorded and we definitely want to make that happen. So
that is a great thing for us.
Yeah, that shows that, that's what reciprocal partnerships are. And we're looking for the university to build sustainable and reciprocal partnerships. So this appears to be one of them. So I want to thank Dr. Kraft for allowing me. And did we introduce, I just saw Dr. Jones, Dean Jones is on the call. Did we introduce her?
I understand. She messaged me and said she's listening, but she can't chime in.
Okay. The technology is so wonderful when it works.
Yeah, right.
I would
so
just
Dr. Messino, I see the lines. I was going to say we don't see the lines, but now I'm starting to see the lines. So.
I'm getting them too. And if I'm in charge of the agenda, I lost view of the agenda. I don't see it anymore.
So I just appreciate, you thinking of the university and wanting to engage our students because they are, I appreciate what you said, Ms. Pennycuff, about they are, whoever said that about the students are the future of Austin, Central Texas, just in general. We have a lot of Bayards running around on our campus. And we just need partnerships that, lift them up and believe in them more than they believe in themselves, and to be able to take them to another level. And this feels like this is that kind of thing. And it helps us to anchor ourselves into our faith-based roots as well. So that's another part of it.
We definitely want to, that we don't endorse candidates either, but even beyond that, I know what you're saying, that you've got to be, even if it's just a political position. So, in our congregation, we definitely will kind of walk with you on that. And I know you have to leave, but we'll circle back because we have two concrete proposals to work together on doing a night of conversations around higher ed funding and another one in April around community policing, and doing it in a way that allows for back and forth and conversation, not just kind of taking a position.
And even though I'm stepping off the call, you have people who do the work. The people think that the president, makes decisions and things like that. You have the people in the room that are in the Hollywood shuffle squares that are capable of saying how the institution stands on things.
Great. Well, shall we kind of shift? And I know there's folks that, and I encourage Monique and Fanny in the conversation. I know we didn't have time for the full stories on the issues, but please get in the conversation and kind of lift up any points. But I think it might be good if we shifted to, there were two other topics that we had been asked to kind of address together. One is the idea of how does an agenda get set? And then maybe talking specifically about, at least Monday night, what that night of conversations around higher ed funding could look like. Should we shift that to that now, Dr. Sarissa? Okay. So how do we look at issues? Let me kind of share just this one piece, because I know this question has come up from the students, and how do we kind of set agendas? Let me get through all this. Oh, darn it. Okay. So let me just say this. So we look for issues through listening first, through one-on-one meetings. House meetings is a term for small group meetings that we use, comes from the farm workers movement. But issues can also present themselves. If the governor announces tomorrow cuts to higher ed funding, we don't need to do house meetings to know we're going to take that issue on. So we want to kind of look at issues sometimes present themselves. We also look for issues that bring lots of people to the table. We don't want issues that's just one person, a lone ranger, wants to work on something. We want issues that are going to kind of create energy and give us an opportunity to work with a lot of people. And also a question we often ask is, what are you willing to fight for? Literally one time we were looking at the CTI agenda with leaders from all of our congregations, and we said, this thing is very long, and I know we want to add some issues, but we got to take some stuff off here because no one's working on this. So we said, answer the question, what do you want to fight for? What do you want to work for? That's what will stay on the agenda. And then finally, we want to make sure an issue is winnable. It's going to have the right policy impact, but it's also going to help us build our capacity. Because if we take on an issue that splits us, then we're not going to have the power to work over the long term. Let me stop there and ask for any kind of reactions, thoughts, reactions.
I just want to say how brilliant. I mean, it's a marvelous approach, and it's just so rich, and it's the art of politics. So I can see just all kinds of connections to coursework and that we can be a catalyst for development for a far richer experience of political science than I know is going on anywhere else.
Fanny, would you want to talk just for a minute about the community policing issue, why we identified that? That can be an example of how we identified and why we decided to take that issue on.
Sure. Community policing is something that impacts every one of us. It impacts minorities, low-income people, homeless, and others more than others. And because of friction, tension, fear in the community, we have developed a relationship with the police department, with the leaders, the police chief, commanders, area representatives. We've also developed relationships with city council members, the city mayor, and others involved in issues around policing. And we also have a relationship with the Office of Police Oversight, which has a new beginning. I think it's been in operation about 2 years now. And in these relationships, we're able to have house meetings. We're able to have civic academies where we come together and identify our worries and concerns, as well as those of, on the other side, the police officers, their concerns and worries. And with the actions that have happened since the killing of George Floyd, our city has been moved to a greater permanence toward doing something to make changes within the police department. And right now we are in conversation with the Police Oversight Committee. We had a meeting with them today, and also the Deputy City Manager. And we're talking about our vision on what is needed to bring about a safer, more equitable policing system here in the city of Austin. We are presenting our ideas. We are in on meetings that are designed to recruit or you know, do something about how officers are trained. We are taking a part in all of that because we have the relationships already built. And we are working very, very hard to move our community toward community policing, where police and community are working together to make positive things happen in our community, to know who is in the community, what their issues are, what their concerns are, what their challenges are, so that we can work together to make life better for people involved in the system.
Thanks, Fanny. And in a few minutes, I'm going to ask Ms. Doolittle and Ms. Vasquez to talk a little bit about an invitation to one of these community policing civic academies that our East Side cluster will be hosting. But if y'all can give me just a minute, because we want to talk a little bit about, so here's the deal. Our proposal as the best way to figure out a relationship is to try some things together. And we have worked out with Professor Sarissa and the students that we would do a couple, what we hear this term civic academy. Basically, it is a training session on an issue area with the space for conversations. So at a community policing, it's 15 or 20 minutes of teaching on community policing, or the 8 Can't Wait priorities that the city is looking at, or our priorities right now. Break people up into groups with officers and residents and talk about your experience with public safety, talk about your experience with police. And you get some very raw stories, very personal stories. But we do that around, you know, same thing with education. We do that tomorrow night. There's a civic academy on healthcare and vaccinations. So we are scheduled to do a civic academy, and we'd like to invite some of you into the planning of this next Monday on the 22nd from 7 to 8:30. We had talked about doing some conversations around higher ed funding with a focus on HBCU funding. And that would be Monday, March 22nd from 7 to 8:30. And the target audience and participants would be CTI leaders, HT students, and stakeholders at Houston-Tillotson. And, you know, the agenda, the basic structure of a civic academy is to do a teaching piece on whatever subject you're talking about. In this case, higher ed and HBCU funding. Break up and do small group conversations. What's your reaction to what you learned? What's been your experience with higher education? Or if you haven't had any, what's your experience with education in general? If you haven't gone to college. And then a call to action. What do we want to do from here? Do we want to talk to our legislators? Do we want to talk to the commissioner of higher ed? Do we want to talk to Congress people or their staffs around where is funding right now in the federal budget or the state budget. There was a study that came out 2 years ago or last year that said HBCUs in Texas receive $2,500 less per student than flagship universities. And so the idea is we would do this on Monday night. Our leaders, our expertise and students have been trained in how to hold house meetings, how to hold these conversations. Frankly, we need to partner with you to put the teaching part together, because frankly, we're not experts on HBCU funding. And maybe some of you are not experts on that part of Houston Tillotson, the budget part, but are there some folks in the university that can help us put that together over the next week, and some of the students, be part of putting that together. So that is coming up on the 22nd. And
Doug, I want to ask Dr. Vandervoort if we had that expertise.
Yeah.
Well, definitely that is not my expertise, but I think we have people here that can make very good contributions to that discussion. So I will reach out to those who have that expertise to join the conversation.
That'd be great. And if there's anyone in particular that you think we should meet with, a combination of CTI leaders and maybe some of the student leaders in advance, so that we can kind of do a little learning in advance of that, that would be great.
Dr. V, let me tell you, Kennedy is and she wants to learn about education policy. So we want to make her part of that meeting.
Okay.
Let me ask Kennedy, any reactions, or Danny or any of the students that are here, any reaction to do you think students would be interested in that conversation around funding next Monday night? Or are you interested in that conversation specifically?
I'm personally interested because I have an interest in public policy, but I personally can't speak on my peers because it is spring break and we do resume classes on Monday. So I don't believe they would have enough time to prepare because I assume no one's checking their email right now.
What do you think about attending? Do you think you could put word out to folks to attend?
Yes, I can. We can, public leadership, we can get together and try to find a way to connect with them.
That'd be great. And we'd be willing to meet with you all this week. Because to me, the real work of organizing is kind of rolling up the sleeves and getting new groups of folks to work together on something. So let me ask the CTI leaders who would be interested in helping put this together for Monday night. Joy, Catherine, I know is part of that. Henry, okay, Dorothy. So why don't we look at maybe a meeting, and if we have anyone from HT that we think might be helpful in this, either in that meeting or a separate meeting, that we look towards gathering later in the week and then putting that together. And again, it's turnout and then putting the agenda together. So, but we'd like it to be a collaboration. We're in the last few minutes here, so we have another one planned that we want to give the date for, and we'll drop it in the chat. But Ms. Doolittle, would you talk about the Academy coming up in April?
Right. April the 12th at 7 p.m., we will have a Civic Academy on community policing. And it's going to be hosted by the East Side Cluster Group of CTI and Houston Tillotson University as well. And this is open to the CTI leaders and HT Houston Tillotson students. We will be joined by 8 or 10 police on that call, and have invited also the Office of Police Oversight will be there, as well as the Deputy City Manager's Office, and probably some other stakeholders as well. The Civic Academy includes 3 parts. We've already kind of talked about that, but there is a teaching component. So there's so many definitions of community policing. So we're going to identify what community policing is in the house meeting model that we do at CTI. And then the second part, which is the largest part, is the residents and officers engage in a dialogue to learn of the challenges officers currently face, and for the officers to gain understanding of the challenges that the residents currently face. And then they share stories, and out of those stories, issues that affect affect us. So then these stories, there's some identification of opportunities where we can really work together. And then the next step is continuing.
Great. And because of these, it's an iterative process. You know, our leaders got called in when the city council was analyzing the 8 can't wait recommendations of police reform, and the city managers called the leaders in. That's where they were this afternoon, giving feedback on those policy recommendations. And so because of that, they're called in as community experts. Monique, would you add anything to that, or Dorothy, anything?
Yeah, I would just like to add one more thing. Mr. Hall and I have been working side by side on this since 2016, and also with Ms. Alcambala. So we really have had tons of meetings with not only the police officers, but with the union, even the unions and all the city council. It's been a long learning process. So thank you, Mr. Hall, for your help.
Yes. Doug, can I come in for a minute?
Sure, please.
Could have very well misunderstood the doctor lady that just went off. And correct me if I'm wrong. I heard her mention that there was some anti-community policing people. Did anybody else hear that at HT?
Yeah, yeah. She was talking about how, you know, we are a diverse campus with lots of voices.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure that I heard her correct. Thank you.
And understand also, there's a lot of things that, you know, there is a sentiment out there, because police forces will often use that term in a way that describes things that aren't real community policing. So there's a genuine mistrust of well, are we being given, you know, a snow job here, or is this the real thing? And so that's something we have to overcome when we do community policing as well. Is this just another project by the police force that is kind of giving lip service to community engagement or not? So, but hopefully we can kind of work through some of those questions as we go forward. Monique, any final thoughts?
Just that when we do the training, part of that is a grounding and a shared language, but also that it's an opportunity to engage in discussions. And from folks' stories, that is like the core of the house meeting, is that you get to engage one-on-one and hear diverse opinions that you might not otherwise. So we call them house meetings because it would normally take place in you would think of it taking place in a house, but they can engage anywhere, but they are personal, public kind of gatherings.
And it's
Great.
important that it's a small group where everyone can be heard. So house meetings usually are not more than 8 to 10 people, ideally 3 to 5 people.
So
And
I
that's
know
an example of us borrowing from a movement. The farm workers movement is where we borrowed that technique from. But let's pass it back to Professor Sarissa.
No, I don't know if we have time, but I would like to, I know Amanda's done a lot, Dr. Messina has done a lot of work on sustainability and housing, and there's been some, I know, discussion of interest among students with respect to housing. And so maybe some other time we can talk about what y'all are doing with sustainability and around housing.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, and that also the research and the research that we support on housing, we can't do direct advocacy, but what we can do is work with organizations to give them some insight into their programs that are working and not working, and then they can translate that into advocacy. So that's what we try to do. Mostly looking at, we've looked a lot at home repair programs, a little less at fully subsidized housing. And that housing work also ties into our environmental justice major. And I do want to mention that, especially with Dr. Kraft. I think he might have had to go, but the other thread of work that we could weave in here has to do with that environmental justice major. It's one of our new majors. And built into that is project work. So the students in the major, as part of their capstone, have to work with an organization doing environmental justice research, community outreach, some sort of project that serves the organization meeting an environmental justice goal. And also in that major is some of the work that Dr. Kraft and I are doing together, which is about science and religion and the environment, and how interfaith approaches that kind of galvanize action around shared values can be applied in the environmental field, and why they haven't really. You know, we don't have a lot of environmental action that draws on that, at least not at the movement level, not yet. And so that's something that we're also injecting into the curriculum that could be a really interesting place for a student to connect and then work on an issue and work with an organization on.
Well, all of those issues you just described kind of came to a head together with the recent storm. If you're talking about environment, energy, housing, you know, and I think also what are the role of civic and religious institutions having to step up and do a lot of the direct relief and repair work that we think the public sector should be taking care of. But I think we'd love to talk with you as a follow-up, Professor, and really think about housing and the environment, because those are issues we're concerned about too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Professor Sarissa, I'm going to turn it back over to you to bring us home. We laid out our proposed next steps, and it looks like folks are at least interested in taking those initial next steps together.
Indeed. So, you know, we got it on tape, and there's been lots been said, but I've heard some definite commitments, and so I think we have something to work on, a clear direction.
I want to recognize Professor Sarissa and the students for all of their, I mean, it's been 2 years this is the result of building for 2 years, and the students have hung in there, and through COVID and through storms and through, you know, really some historic moments, you know, in the nation in the last couple of years. So we appreciate y'all continuing to give this a shot. Sometimes it doesn't move as fast as we hope, but let's hang in there together.
All right. So I'm sure we'll be circling back, and thanks everybody. Thank you for being here, and we really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Thank you.
The CTI folks, do we want to go back to our other?
Yeah, I'm going to end the meeting, and
okay.
Have a great night, folks.
Bye.
Good night.
Thanks again.